Good morning, everyone. Is this on? Do I have it on for the camera? Good, 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 good. It's good to see everyone. Make sure I have everything on and working. Looks good, looks good. It's good to be with you all. Seem to have been working hard. In these times, community service to me is one of the front lines of ministry and finishing the work that we have to do. So you serve a very, very important role. I'll give a little introduction to myself before we go into all these issues. My name is Josue Pierre, product of Brooklyn, New York, born and raised. Went to Northeastern Academy, so I went to Christian school, Adventist school. Went to Andrews, son of a pastor, and I swore I would never work for the church. That's why I became a lawyer, and the Lord is very humorous, because I'm here. There are about 5 attorneys in the Office of General Counsel in the General Conference, and each attorney really covers different areas. I mainly do contracts, real estate, and procurement. Those are the kind of areas that I specialize in, but we all help each other out. So yes, Karnik was scheduled to be here, and I think up until Monday he was still trying to see if he could come, but his schedule didn't allow, and so they sent me instead. So this morning we're going to go through a little bit of a training and go through some of the legal issues that you as leaders in community service, which is an important task on behalf of your conference, will undergo. And because you do community service and you community, and you may have volunteers and you may have employees and you may have to use services of other folks, there are a lot of legal issues that will arise. And we want to make sure that you're informed, you have good information, and you have resources. And I want to tell you our office is committed. We don't just do work for the General Conference. We also provide legal services for the North American Division. And if you are part of the North American Division, we are here to help you. And then so if there are any questions or resources that you need in a legal perspective, we always invite you to give us a call. And if we're not able to help you, we can at least point you in the right direction. All right? So here we go. Understanding and dealing with different legal issues. This is our copyright information. You're going to need that kind of stuff at the beginning of your module so you can keep those from using your stuff without permission.
We had it and they deleted it.
Oh. We're going to talk about ways that you could address that issue. All right? So there's 3 methods that we learn wisdom, right? First is by reflection, which is the noblest. The second by imitation, which is the easiest. And the third is by experience, which is the bitterest, right? This is a Confucius saying, and one of my teachers used to tell us students all the time, a hard head makes for a hard bed, So let's learn by reflection and by imitation so that we can avoid learning by the third part, by experience, okay? So we're going to take a stroll down the legal concerns and review certain basic topics. Let's see if this works. Yeah, we're going to talk about we're going to statutory. Only have 2 hours. Breach of contract, torts, negligence, defamation, criminal versus civil liability. Talk a little bit about our SDA corporate structure, duties as directors, conflicts of interest, and some trademark and also copyright issues, okay? All right, so if you have any questions, you can feel free to raise your hand. We'll try to get through it. We'll try to go through a little bit of a break so we can get some oxygen. All right? So what is a contract? You know, a contract is simply a promise or a set of promises. The breach of those promises, the law gives a remedy. That's really what a contract is. I promise to bring you a case of bottled water. Or 6 cases of bottled water. You agree to pay me $3 for each case. All right? We've made a promise. And so the performance of which I fail to deliver or you fail to pay, the law gives us certain remedies, okay? And because we recognize that as a duty, all right? So what are some of the elements of a contract? Really, the law looks at 3 things. Is there an offer? Is there an acceptance of that offer? And is there consideration? So what are we talking about when we say that? What we're saying is an offer is we understand and we're on the same page as to what the deal is. I have 3 cases of water or 6 cases of water at $3 a piece. That is a specific offer. We're on the same page. Acceptance, saying I accept to receive those 6 cases at $3 a piece. All right? Consideration is, what is it that's making the bargain binding? You know, on his end, it's the water. On my end, it's the cash that I want to put in my pocket. All right? So you have to have those elements to make a contract binding. So you can't just say, yeah, I agree that I'll bring you water whenever you need it. It's indefinite. It's not specific. Or you say, you know, I want 3 cases of water and I bring you 30 cases. We're not on the same page. All right? The other element that you need is you have to have competent parties, or meaning, do they have the legal capacity to enter into a contract? Which means you don't contract with children, right? You don't, because the law doesn't recognize them as having the capacity to enter into an agreement. You can't go into a contract with someone who is noticeably known not to have it all there, right? Because they don't have the capacity to get into a contract, all right? And here's the thing, you want to make sure that the person who's speaking on behalf of the vendor or the organization actually has the right to do that. But there's some tricky stuff in the law and you have to be very careful, especially you who have employees or people who work under you. Because sometimes people who are part of an organization that have no authority to act can still put the organization into bind. And we'll talk about that. All right? And we talked about legal consideration. Of course, it has to be for a lawful purpose. You can't enforce a contract that is illegal or criminal. You know, the law will not enforce those type of agreements. All right? And we talked a little bit already about consideration. Consideration could be anything that is considered of value. Obviously, the number one issue that you would think that's of value is money, right? But it could also be services, goods, it could be land, it could be promise to do something in the future. It could be a promise not to do something. I agree that I'm not going to work in this area for this amount of time. That is considered consideration. So that's really what they call consideration. Is it of value to the party? Do they consider that to be valuable? All right, so here are some of the types of contracts that you sometimes see. Express contracts are the best. And we always say, you know, one of our sayings is a contract is as good as is as valuable as the paper it's written on. So a contract that you don't bother to put in writing, you really put yourself in peril. All right? Because when the court, if you haven't, what I tell people all the time, because, you know, oftentimes people don't want to get bogged down with the paperwork. You know, we have a good idea, we have a good service, we have a vendor, we have an emergency need. You guys understand what that means? We need to get going. Why do we want to bother and take the time and waste time and money on a contract? Well, I tell people all the time, as long as everything is going well, the contract is never looked at. I have, throughout my history, written so many contracts that literally sits in the drawer and collect dust. Because when everything is going great and everybody's doing exactly what you expected, I came to you on the Monday that you told me and I delivered the 6 cases. You turned around and you gave me the $3 per case. No one needs to go back and look at the contract. It collects dust. And if you tell me, come back next Monday, we sign a contract, and I come back next Monday and I deliver what you asked for and you pay for me, no one goes and looks at the contract. The only time the contract becomes important is when you have a problem. You promised me something you didn't deliver. Now I have damages. But the problem is if you didn't take the time to do a contract, when the problem comes, it's already too late. So doing a contract is all about preventing when a problem happens, and you never can know when the problem will occur, which is why we say always take the time to get a contract, okay? So, yes. It can possibly be written, it can, but it's always so much harder, and it's always so much more uncertainty, and it's also significantly more expensive. So what we're trying to tell you is to give you the best advice or the best practice, rather than me saying, no, we agreed that even though we did 6 cases for the whole year, this next quarter we only wanted 3 cases every Monday. Okay, and then the vendor says, no, we never really had that conversation. In fact, if anything, they said they wanted 7 cases this quarter. Now, how is a judge supposed to know who's right? And so what we're saying is that we're not saying you may not have remedies, but it is significantly harder and much more expensive to try to enforce an agreement that isn't spelled out. And some of your potential remedies are not available to you because it's not there. All right? So what are the defenses to a formation of a contract? One is mistake, but it has to be a mutual mistake. You both have to have made the mistake. It can't be, well, I made the mistake because I didn't really want to obligate myself, or the money that I was expecting to pay for this didn't show up, so it's my mistake. So mistake has to be mutual. We both had a misunderstanding or the communication got mixed up. It can't be a one-sided mistake. So, all right? Kind of already gave it to you ahead of time. So mistake is rare. It's almost like you mutually know you made a mistake. So it's not something that will often be available to you, okay? Like I said, a mistake of one party is generally not a reason to get you out of your obligation.
Question on that one. If an office manager, for sake of argument, signs a contract, their phone provider,
Uh-huh.
they really don't have the authority to do it.
Yeah.
Could that be considered a mistake in a given second at a time limit?
Possibly, but not always. And I'm going to get to that issue of authority, apparent versus actual authority. And we'll get to that. And you have to be very careful about issues of apparent versus actual authority. All right? Save that question. That's a good question. Illegality, we talked about it. You want to end up doing a contract and then you find out that the services that you're asking to be contracted is illegal, or it's a violation of law, or it violates an intellectual property, for example. Those kind of things you can actually get out of a contract because the law will not enforce an illegal action or an action that violates the law. All right? So be aware of that, because sometimes when you don't have an enforceable contract, that also means you don't have remedies at law, such as, I shouldn't have been in this contract. Maybe I need to get my money back. Sometimes you may have those remedies, but a lot of times if you don't have a contract, you also don't have a remedy. All right? So, what are some of the basics that you need in a contract? Obviously, you want to clearly identify the parties. And we think that's a very obvious issue, but it's not. Because sometimes we don't take the time to actually find out who it is that we're actually contracting with. Because just because my sign says, J. Pierre Hot Wheels, that may not even be an entity or anything that you can attach. All right? So you want to take the time to find out, is this entity incorporated or not incorporated? If so, what is the actual legal name of the business? You may want, or if it's not incorporated, then you don't want to do a contract with the name on the sign. You want to do a contract with the actual individual who is responsible. And by the same token, you want to make sure that you clearly identify who you are. And you have to understand, and we'll get to the corporate structure of the church, the lowest corporate formation in the Adventist church is what? Exactly. So from a legal perspective, who should be the party on the contract? Exactly. Very good. We're going to get to that. So don't overlook that simple first step of identifying the right parties. 2, is there a mutual understanding of the agreement? And I think a lot of times people are so excited about what they want to do, they fail to take the time to specifically identify and describe what is the service or what is the goods, and with specificity, what it is that we're agreeing to. Because let me tell you, when you have a dispute, the court is not really looking for you to say, well, I know the paper said X, but we really meant Y. That's not how it works. The court says we should be able to look at the document, and the document should be able to tell us from somebody who has no connection to the program, what is the deal, what is the arrangement, and what are the obligations of each party. So I always tell people, take the time and don't be vague. Because if you leave it vague, then you open yourself up. If it's important for you that the delivery has to be before noon, well, then you must say in the contract that I need to get this service by noon. If you only need this amount and you need it to end on a certain date, then you need to say this contract ends on this date. And if you only have $1,000 in your budget for this specific service, then you need to add an extra line. The cost or the compensation in this contract will not exceed $1,000. Put them at notice. I only have $1,000, and I put it in my contract that the only money that was available to pay for this service is capped at $1,000. So you are on notice. If you do work above and beyond that, the contract told you that the total compensation for this is $1,000. All right, so be very clear. What do each party have to do? And here's the other issue, and I call this the so what if I don't questions. All right, we're quick to say, man, we're in a hurry and we found this great vendor and they said they could do this for us, which is just what we need. Let's go. Well, lawyers are going to ask you, the issue you really need to ask is, so what if they don't? What happens if they do not do what they're supposed to do? What is it that you would like to have happen? You are in a much stronger position if you start explaining in the agreement, and if we fail to do X, or if you fail to do Y, here is what we agree is the resolution to the issue. This is how we're going to solve it, because that makes your ability to enforce your agreement so much easier and so much cheaper. All right? So, of course, what is the consideration? You better be clear that each side is receiving something and it's definitive and you can define it. All right? So here are the questions to ask. Is the agreement complete? Are all the pages there? I've seen people with, when the time comes and they have an issue, page 4 and 5 is not in their copy. You know, and maybe page 4 and 5 is exactly the provisions that you need to get your resolution. All right? Are all references to the parties included? You know, do we have the right parties? Do we have a signature? I've seen that happen as well. We're in such a hurry. We move. Yeah, I have a contract. I said, okay, good. Let's see it. First thing I look at, I look to see the date. I look to see the parties. Then I look to the back. Oh, where's the signature? I don't have it. So what is it? So what is that? That's just a copy. All right. So effective date, when does the contract begin? Does it start as of the date that the contract is signed? Or do we agree that even though we signed it today, the contract starts on this future date? Be very clear with that. And the biggest thing I have is terms and termination. Be very careful. A lot of services that you sign up for, if you're not paying attention, they have these provisions, automatic renewal. So you think you're signing a 1-year contract or a 6-month contract, but it has an automatic renewal date. So what happens if you're not paying attention? You're seeing you're continuing to get invoices. You're like, no, I only agreed for 6 months. Yeah, but they had an automatic renewal. You had to notify them 30 days before. You didn't do that, so now it renews for another year. Right? Or so make sure you see that. You want to always, as much as possible, give yourself clear rights of termination. And if you don't have as much leverage and they highlight, you got to let us know 30 days before your contract terminates that you don't want to go forward. Well, you got to find a way to put that date in your calendar somewhere that gives you notice timely, so you have time to remember, oh, this agreement's about, if I don't want it to continue, I have to terminate it now, or I have it for another year. All right? And I even say any contract that has automatic, never sign a contract that tells you it's infinitely renewable. At best, I say 1, 2 years, and on extreme situations, 3, but usually no more than 3. I usually say, because what you do is you're forcing your vendor to recognize that your business is not automatic. They have to earn it, you know, and if they're not doing a good job, you know that it terminates, you can move on. If they're doing a great job, then you have no problem saying, we're going to renew it. But when you have somebody who knows your contract is automatic renewable and it never ends, there's usually no incentive to give you great service. All right? So consideration, we talked about that. We talked about putting a maximum amount. That was one of the things I put in almost all the contracts we now do in the general conference. I don't care how long it is, how short the service is. What's the maximum amount that you want to pay for this service? Put it in the contract. We've agreed that under this agreement, you're going to earn no more than $5,000, period. And it terminates on this date. All right, so remedies, we want to make sure, think about it. What is the worst thing that could happen under this vendor? And what kind of remedy would you like to see? And if you want, put that in the agreement. Ask for it, because you know, salesmen are great for telling you everything great that the service will do and the product will provide. But I'm going to tell you 99% of the time, whatever the salesman told you is not necessarily reflected in the agreement. And the defense that will never work for you in court is to say, the salesman told me that it would do A, B, C, and D, but I signed the contract that actually told you the opposite. I've seen contracts where they say, we guarantee you're going to get this, and we guarantee this is going to happen. And then you look in the contract and it says, we make no guarantees as to X, Y, and Z. Right? So what you signed in the contract is what is enforceable. So you make sure. In fact, what I tell people, one of the best practices is when your salesman is telling you the bells and whistles, write it down. Oh, you said it does this? All right, yeah. What else did you say it does? Oh, and you guarantee, right? And then what you say is, when the contract comes, you wanna compare. Okay, your salesman told me it does 5 things, and I wrote them all down. Why? I want to see those 5 things in the contract. And if they're telling you they can't put it in the contract, that should be your red flag. All right? And trust me, they see you differently when you are writing down what they say, and you saying, I want to see what you told me in the contract. All right? Breach of contract is basically one person not doing what they're supposed to do. And that's when the contract becomes extremely important. And that's why I tell people, if you didn't take your time at the front end, you give us very little remedies. And that's where lawyers really make their money. They make their money because people didn't take the time to put the things on paper. Because when you put your contract on paper and it's clear what the obligations are, usually the dispute doesn't last very long, because both sides can read the agreement and they understand what the outcome is going to be in court. The clearer your agreement is, the clearer the remedies are, the less there's going to be a dispute. All right? So what are some of the damages remedies? We talk about specific performance. That's where you can force what you asked for to happen. And that is very rare. That is almost only available in a land contract. If you sign a contract for a property and the seller doesn't want to sell it to you, the law basically sees there's only one remedy available to you. If you have an enforceable contract, they will force the sale to go through. But understand, there are certain agreements that if it is not in writing, the court doesn't even entertain it at all. One of them are contracts for land, goods over $500, services that extend over a year. Those are the 3 that you will most likely see. There's some others, but it's usually more technical. But those 3, if they're not in writing, don't even bother coming to complain. It's not an enforceable agreement. But damages is the usual remedy. All right, I don't want to skip through that too quick. And damages is basically like, okay, now I have to find another vendor, and it's going to cost me more. Or I've been late, you know. The more, and I need to be restored back to the position I was in before I entered into the agreement. More likely than not, the court will look to give you economic damages. All right, they're not going to give you damages because your feelings were hurt or because I was mad. You know, it's all about what you can quantify. So if essentially, let's say the guy I failed to deliver my 6 cases at $3 a piece, but my brother came in and gave you 6 cases at $2 a piece. You can't really sue because the court's going to say you didn't really suffer economic damages. In fact, you're better off. You understand? But if you end up having to pay $5 a case where you had a contract for 3, then you have economic damages. All right, but you're not going to get damages because you're mad or you were very frustrated because it took you so much longer. You're only going to get the economic damages in a contract case. All right? We talked about terms already, so we can skip that. So an attorney review. People say that's time consuming. It can get expensive. You know, we got an emergency. We're going to get moving. But why is it? Why shouldn't you use an attorney? A lot of people say it costs too much, but I'm going to tell you, lawsuits and disputes cost a whole lot more. All right? So an ounce of prevention is worth what? Exactly. Takes too long. We got to move. You know, the emergency's happening right now. Well, let me tell you, when you don't get what you're supposed to get or the things don't work out the same, lawsuits will take a whole lot more time and energy. All right? So shortness doesn't always, and that's the other thing, I always see this too. Don't make the contract too long because, you know, the vendor's going to see so many pages, they're going to walk away. Just make it simple. Well, simple doesn't always mean the best, because some of the very provisions that we cut out will be the very provision that would have made your issue resolvable. And let me tell you, people who are going to do what they say they're going to do normally don't have a problem signing a contract. And I'm going to tell you that again. People who say and do what they say they're going to do normally don't have an issue signing a contract because they're going to do it. The people who tell you, nah, I don't want to, that should always be your red flag. A vendor to me who don't want to sign a contract is a vendor I'm not going to do business with, period. All right? No one has ever been sued, has sued us before on a contract like this. I've heard that too. We've never had a problem. So why? Because the one time you have the problem, you're going to wish you had the contract. All right? So what is the best practice? The best practice is to have, especially a complicated contract, but even take the time to maybe create templates. If you know there's a kind of service that you tend to see on a repetitive basis, you can pay one time to say, create me a template where I can fill in the blanks. It's already pre-made. I know whenever I need to use this service, I have this template already done. We just got to fill in the specific information. We got a contract, we're ready to go. All right? Because of course, if you refuse to follow this best practice, you may have to explain why you didn't take the better practice and now you got more work for your organization. Question in the back.
Yeah, small nonprofit, we don't have that much money. You think we can software use, even in Nodal? What's your take on that?
It's better than not having anything. All right? It's better than not having anything. You know, I'm a big believer in getting conferences. I actually suggest for conferences to find attorneys, and it doesn't have to be the biggest and the most expensive firms, and negotiate with them. You know, we tend to have about a certain amount of contracts every year. You can negotiate with them ahead of time. We think we're going to need this amount of review. Let's negotiate that we're going to pay you a fixed amount that you're going to be available to us so that when these things happen, we can have you review it.
And I think you mentioned the thing of a kind of a draft.
Yes, a template.
With construction attorney we work with, he says, look, I know you're going to have multiple subcontractors, so here's the template, change the name, change the company.
Yes.
But so he does the work once and we can do it.
Exactly. And it's a good investment. I'm going to tell you, your new North American Division headquarters, they were in a rush to get moving. They wanted to move really quickly. And I was like, no, you're not. You know, but I did understand they had time constraints. So part of what we did was do exactly that. I had a simple contract for relatively small services, but the big, expensive 6-7 figure agreements, we had another template that we had worked out, and they were like, you will use this one. And it's a great leveraging tool too, because of course a lot of vendors would say, no, I want you to use mine. But I was like, if time is the essence, you let your vendor know. You use your lawyer's pre-approved template. It's a quick, fast process and you're going. If you want to use your contract and we got to review it, we're going to have some changes and we got to negotiate and we got to go back and forth. So you pick which one is important to you. So a lot of times you show speed and getting payments done process, they're like, oh, okay, we'll use yours. All right? So that's contracts in a nutshell. So what is a tort? There is a French pastry called a tort. But what we're talking about is what happens when someone is hurt or something wrong happens to someone in a civil setting, right? Sometimes a wrong can be considered a criminal act and a civil act. But when we're talking simply about civil actions where somebody has been wronged, it's called a tort. All right? And that's where you get to get damages not only for the injury, but the fact that you were frustrated and your feelings were hurt. So torts can get very, very expensive. All right? Whereas contract only deals with the economic loss, there's a whole range of damages that torts will cover. So what is a tortfeasor? The person who committed the wrong. It's not just the person, it's also the organization. All right? So it's not just the person, it is also the organization who commits the tort. All right? So what are some of the types of torts? There's intentional tort. That's where I intentionally cause harm. You know, I'm so mad at your executive director, I walk up and I punch him in the face. That's an intentional tort. It's also a criminal act, so he can have me arrested, but he can also sue me civilly for that intentional tort. All right? And then there's negligence. All right? I was pulling out, I was parallel parking, and I'm not very good at it, and I went too fast and too hard. I smashed the car behind. I didn't mean to do it, but I caused the harm. That's negligence, right? Strict liability is where the law says you can never do this. You can never use this chemical. You cannot use leaded paint. You cannot expose children to this. And you do it. The court says we're not going to, there's a strict liability. Once we figure out you've done the action, you're liable for all the damages that come with it. All right? So, liability for volunteers. When I know, how many of you use volunteers? Huh? We all do, right? The church depends on volunteers. But the law requires that when they're doing work for us or while they're doing the work, they still have to provide reasonable care. You still have to show that they have some kind of training and that they are qualified to do what they're doing, right? That they pose no known threat to the community or the people that they're serving. All right, because this is just code for duty. And so in the eyes of the law, there really is no difference as far as the liability of an organization because the person who did the wrong is a volunteer versus an employee.
There's no difference.
None. So you don't get to say, well, they were volunteers, so the conference is not responsible.
There's no difference.
All right? So this is why we say the issue of screening, selection, and supervision is absolutely important. You can't overlook screening because you think it's going to hurt somebody's feelings. And I see that happen so many. This person's been so good. And, they're going to be upset if we make them go through the screening. Exactly. Because here's the worst case scenario. There's something called deposition. Has anybody ever been in a deposition? Yeah, you have. Is it a pleasant? It is not a pleasant experience, right? This is even before you get to court. All right, we sitting at a table, and the lawyers get to ask you all kinds of questions, and the way that depending on how you answer, I see the dollar signs. And it's under oath, so you can't lie. And you have to answer. You can't decide, I'm upset, I ain't answering that. I said, sir.
Permit me to go back to no difference between volunteer and employee in the eyes of the law. Are you saying that the benefits that are given to an employee, that if you have a volunteer, that somewhere down the road that volunteer could claim those benefits?
Only in certain situations, but when I'm talking about no difference, I'm talking about from the perspective of a tortfeasor. So an employee that causes an accident on the intersection, the organization's going to be liable. There really is no difference if a volunteer working under the auspice of the organization causes the same accident. The organization is still responsible. All right? So I was talking about the deposition, for example. I'll sit you down. I'm going to say, you're part of this organization, aren't you? You have to answer. This organization has a policy book, doesn't it? Yes. Okay. And this policy book, on page so-and-so, section so-and-so says that all volunteers are supposed to be screened. Yes or no? Had you done this screening, would you have known that this person had this behind their record? And had you done this screening, then this person wouldn't have been exposed to victimize so-and-so. So you didn't follow your own policy. And because you didn't follow this policy, this happened, and we're here. I'll go to you, then you. Yeah.
In a few churches I have, Spanish churches, there's some people, some of our members
Yep.
with non-legal status
Yes.
in the country, and some of them refuse to do the screening. What's the approach on that aspect?
The policy is your friend. But a violator of the policy will tell on you. I keep saying do not, because I can ask you, I don't have to, but I can ask you, why didn't you follow your own policy? And if your answer is, well, I didn't want to hurt the feelings of brother so-and-so, so I didn't follow it. Follow your policy. We are in an age, after what happened in the Catholic Church, all right, of too many incidents where they knew and they didn't do anything. So now the law imposes on churches generally that you are supposed to take some steps. So here's really the balance: the safety of children versus the feelings of your adult member. The safety of the community versus the feelings of that person. And let me tell you, when something bad happens, you will never be able to justify the fact that you put the feelings of that person ahead of the safety of the community.
Okay, now in regards to the screening, how does a person go throughout this process of screening? I mean, how does the church do it? What do they,
Great question.
yeah.
The North American Division went through an expansive process where we looked at different vendors, and I was on that committee. We assessed the vendors We told them what we needed. We explained the organization. And the vendor that we replaced, the former vendor, because they weren't doing what they were supposed to, we brought in a new vendor, which is a vendor that normally does background checks for the federal government. So they're pretty high up, but they have a small section that basically serves nonprofits. So we have a contract that basically that covers all our unions, all our conferences, and and so your conference secretary knows.
We have the person that is in charge of it is Pastor Schaffelberg, and we have made this known to our pastors and elders
Yes.
many, many times.
Yes. So you have volunteers, especially any volunteers that are working. It's not just, we used to say just with children, but we basically say you have any volunteers that are doing excessive amount of work, you better put them through a background check. If they're working through money, they have a service that does a background check for people who work with money. If they are drivers, there's a service to do a background check to make sure that they are decent drivers. All right?
So, okay.
Hold on, let me give this lady, and then well, let me follow up with you.
So, okay, the church is looking, the ACS of the local church is looking to have some volunteers. I assume we have some application that the person chooses, that they choose to fill out, okay? And so is that application provided for us, or is that something that we have to make ourselves?
Actually, it's online. You call the conference office, but it's called Verified Volunteers, but there's a link. The link is connected to your conference. It's very easy. All the person does is basically send them the email. And then the system generates an email to let the person know. They got a link, click the link. The link takes them to the site. They put in their information for the background check, and it gives them training. I'm glad. Uh-huh. You have to.
You must. Okay. Some of them want to drive the children. I said, no, it's not happening under my leadership.
Right.
So sometimes what they'll do it behind my back. I said, the email, if anything happens, don't come to me.
Right.
Take your own risk.
And you take it to the board, and you let the board know this, and you let them know, don't get mad at me. The lawyer from the general conference came down. And you blame it on us. You say the lawyer from the general conference came all the way down to Greater New York and told us everybody has to do the screening. So blame it on me. And he's from Brooklyn, so, all right?
And we will support her.
Yes. The conference will support you. Let me tell you, doing the screening will not immunize the conference from liability if something bad happens. I hate to say that. More likely than not, we still may end up having to be liable. But the truth is, the law doesn't necessarily hold an organization responsible for bad acts. What they hold you responsible for is for failure to doing the necessary actions that would have protected from the bad acts. Failure to supervise. Failure to follow your own policies that could have avoided the situations. That's how we get hit. So I don't care if 10 times nothing happens. It only has to happen once, okay? It's like, you tell them it's like terrorism, all right? We have to protect from all the incidents all the time. They only have to hit one time. So that's really why we can't be negligent in those issues. Yes?
What if one has gone through that process with another company does have a past? Do we have to still do it through the conference?
Yes. Because that other company is not going to, because We have remedies if they fail to do something. If our company failed to find what they should have found, we would have certain remedies against our company. We have no relationship with that other company, and so they can't be held liable for making a mistake.
Background check can sound like a little bit intimidating for many people.
Screening.
How is basically, and how can we explain what it's about, and how is the process and what's going to happen? I mean, people maybe think that it's going to, okay, they're going to know everything on my life.
I know. There are privacy concerns, but we've really addressed, let me tell you, the North American Division, the unions, the conferences took special care to talk through these things. It's not available, the information that comes back is not available to the whole conference. It's not even available to all the pastors. It goes to small select people who are under obligation confidentiality. And at best, all you are told is this person didn't pass the screening, so you cannot use them.
And the good thing with the new organization is you own the background check.
Yes.
So the old one didn't have access to it. You'd have to go through us.
Yes.
But the new one, you have access to it, and you can even give another organization access to your background check.
Yes. What we've done is, because we did one for everyone, if someone took a background check in Maryland and under Allegheny East, then they moved into New York, if I said, no, I took the background check this year, which I did, Greater New York can access that background check and get that same information, so you don't have to start all over. And normally we're telling everybody every 2 years, you got to do your background check. All right? Not one time, and not once forgiven, always forgiven. Every 2 years, you got to rerun your background checks. All right?
So you said those who work with children need to do.
Absolutely. That's the highest level. Those who drive. I could tell, I'll give you guys an advance notice. Come October, when the North American Division has its fall conference, I think the policy is going to change and say all officers who have been selected through the nominating committee. So that is coming, because the court will not differentiate between a Pathfinder director or an elder or a deacon. All right, so that's coming. But really, children, drivers, people who handle money, you know, those people gotta have the background check.
Church volunteer who, when they were younger, got in trouble with the law, but it had nothing to do with pedophilia or children. So they're just concerned that you're going to know about it.
Right. It's a public record. All right? I'm not saying that disqualifies the person, but that means you've had to have a consideration and you thought about it. There's certain issues, I would say, like somebody who's been convicted of embezzlement, the Lord forgives. All right? Grace is sufficient. But that person does not need to work in Treasury. You understand? So someone who had an issue with and had to register as a sexual predator, the Lord forgives. You know, God's grace is sufficient. But that person should not be working with Pathfinders. Find them something else to do. But they should not be working with Pathfinders. They should not be working with youth. They should not be your Sabbath school children teacher. And I know their feelings may be hurt, but we have to put the interests of kids ahead of people's feelings.
Here's an example. Someone who comes back blind because they had a 5 years ago, prior to baptism. I don't think that would disqualify them. But someone who had a test last year,
I'll let conferences figure out what their policy should be, but there's some common sense things. Like I said, picture yourself at a deposition. Picture yourself trying to explain why you didn't take what seemed like the simple and ordinary step.
Question, kind of screening or background check is kind of police report or something that conference would provide?
What the conference will get the result. There's a lot of public databases that are out there. So this service knows how to search and search them quickly. And if they get a hit, there are certain people within each conference that gets the information. And for the most part, I think those people will just let the pastor know this one had a hit, so they can't work here. So we're not trying to put everybody's information out there, but if they want to discuss it with you, fine. But for the most part, you're getting a all clear or somebody's not cleared. And that should be enough.
But if someone asked me to do a background check,
Uh-huh.
right, what do I have to do? To go to police report and go to the conference?
The conference will give you the information. For the most part, the conference will tell you. The way the whole system works, you just need the email of the person. The person gets an email from our vendor saying you have to click into this link. It'll take them. They set up an account. They give their information and they do a training. The person at the conference level has a report that tells them who has done it and who hasn't. And so usually your church clerk will end up having a report that says, here are the people who have done their screening. So you'll know who has done it and who hasn't. And then your pastor may know who's clear and who's not clear. Possibly. Possibly. Like I said, an organization's liability is what did you do when you knew or you should have known?
So what is the scope of this background check? Because we have, we are immigrants here.
Yes.
People that come to church.
Yes.
Maybe they were convicted there or had a serious issue.
Yes.
That they came here, start new life.
Right.
So what is the scope?
We try to do as comprehensive as we can. Obviously, certain countries we can get certain information, certain countries we cannot, But the whole goal is to try to show that we thought it was important enough to protect our community, and so we try to do the best that we can. It's not perfect. So if you know of something, you essentially have put the organization on notice, whether it came up on the background check or not.
Yeah, thank you so much. Because my thought here is that this is an excellent tool, but also we really have to use common sense.
Absolutely.
So we have to make calls. Sometimes we have somebody that shows in the church.
Just showed up.
Leadership, next year we just appointed. You know what I mean? But just if you make, because we have internal challenges, you make a call, from pastor to pastor here and there.
Yes.
You could prevent many things.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I want to keep going because my time is almost short.
So let's just say, just a real quick question. All right, a person can kind of like tell you and say, hey, yeah, I did such and such and so, blah, blah, blah. And you know that they're in a particular position. What is your advice? The person, should I go to the pastor and say, hey, such and such and so happened. What should I do? Should I go to them or should I go
The court,
to the conference or?
let me tell you what I would do as a lawyer. If you know, I will impute to the whole organization as if they knew and they failed to take the necessary action. Because if the question, like I said, at the end of the day, the organization gets in trouble for failing to take reasonable steps to protect. So if you knew and you failed to take an action, just because you didn't share it with the organization, I'm going to say, but you knew, and which means you had the same kind of knowledge as if the background check had told you. If you failed to take an action, I'm going to hold the organization responsible.
Like if you know someone, his first job, if you know someone molested a child, his first job is to contact child, what do you call it?
Protective services?
Protective.
Yes.
And let your pastor know.
Yes.
Your responsibility. And
Oh, we absolutely have a duty to report.
those are questions when you do your survey on it, I did mine, and they'll ask you those questions, about 10 questions.
They do a training. That's the nice part. You don't just give your information. They actually have a training to explain to you what are signs, and then they also tell you what is your obligation as far as reporting when you hear something. Yes.
You check in what conference you are in, to get exactly.
In the interest of time, which one you take?
Thank you. All right, let me do that because I got to blow through. Negligence, we talked about that. Understanding duties of negligence, that's what we were talking about, so I'm going to go a little faster. What would a prudent person in that situation would have done? And that's why I'm telling you, that's what you need to weigh. Did I take the necessary steps to protect my community, to protect my children? And let me tell you, it's never okay to say, well, I didn't want to embarrass so-and-so, or so-and-so, would have been hurt if I told. That's never a good reason, okay? So, failure to act, when a reasonable and prudent person would have acted. Failure to supervise, because you guys are leaders. If you sit there and send a whole bunch of volunteers to go do stuff and you take off for 7 hours and then a big mistake happens and the person who has supervisory role was not even there, you've put the organization at risk. All right? So here are the elements of a negligence claim. It's very easy. Did you have a duty? And the duty is very simple. If we're in a church, we have a duty to provide a safe environment, period. End of story. All right? 2, breach, you failed to meet that standard of care, and the harm is caused because of your failure. You get those 3 things, you get to the golden land of damages. And damages have been very expensive, and the church has been paying a lot. Because no one looks at us and says, oh, they're a church. No problem. They hold us to the same level of obligation, okay? All right? It's criminal versus civil liability. We talked about this already. Criminal acts results in, you're being handled by the state. All right? State takes action. But that civil liability, you got to pay damages. And sometimes you make a mistake, you are subject to both. All right? And let me tell you, it's not okay to know somebody hurt a child and not report it. I don't care how much you know them, how close you are to their family. You report, because you're not only they'll find out, but you open your church to civil liability for your failure to take proper steps, okay? Criminal act, guilty or not guilty, whether you go to jail or you get to walk out of the courtroom, civil liability, you're liable, that means you're paying money. All right? Understanding the corporate structure of the Adventist Church. Corporation is a company or group of people authorized to act as a single entity. So in the eyes of the law, a corporate entity is a legal person for the eyes of the court, right? And they're recognized as that. So associations, partnerships, sole proprietorships, corporations, nonprofit organizations, all have that legal fiction of being a legal person. All right? So they said they're treated just like people. Corporation has a perpetual life. Officers move in and out. Directors move in and out. The organization is considered perpetual unless it's ended formally by law. It's empowered to enter into contracts. It can lease, it can borrow, it can lend money, it can buy property, it can own property, it can give out goods and services without imposing the liability on individuals who are acting out those activities on behalf of the organization. That's why it's very important that when you do actions, you do it within the sphere of your organization, because then it's the organization and not you. All right? You don't want to put yourself out there where you're outside and then now you're liable. Okay? Recourse against a legal entity and not individuals. That's definitely what you want. You know? And the limited liabilities to the assets of the organization, not the individuals, if you do it right. So what are some of the differences in a for-profit? For-profit is owned by shareholders. You know, shareholders are ultimately the people who buy stock. They are the owners. They're entitled to make a profit. There's a profit motive in a for-profit entity. They can distribute assets to owners. Those are what is different between a profit and a nonprofit. So a lot of these things, they don't apply to nonprofits. All right, they can be sold. Directors can be compensated for serving on boards. Here's the difference with a nonprofit. Usually it started for a particular purpose. So whereas a corporation for-profit is open-ended, what it can do, an organization that is organized for a charitable purposes is a specific purpose. That doesn't mean every idea under the sun you can do. All right? You have usually members. It's a mission-driven organization, not a profit-driven, so you got to remember that. People are always pushing for, well, we can make a lot of money. Well, we're not a profit organization. There are things that we can't do. All right? Can't be sold. It can only be dissolved. And when it's dissolved, the assets must go into another charitable organization. And if it can't go into another charitable organization, it has to go to the government. Period. So you cannot say, hey, we've put in 40 years of work. So now that this thing is done, we get to take some of the, no. The law does not give you that, all right? So who is a nonprofit? No one. But because everyone owns it, right? And charities exist for the public good, all right? Not religious purpose, educational, poverty relief, beneficial to society. That, if your mission is not within that sphere, you got to really question whether what you're doing is within the charitable purposes of your organization. You think that's easy, but sometimes we get lost. So remember, directors are not compensated for their service. All right, we're not saying officers, we're saying directors. Only dissolution of assets can be turned over to another charity. There's greater scrutiny and oversight by the government because you're a nonprofit. All right, your nonprofit status is actually conferred to you by the IRS. Who are persons in the SDA church? Who are the corporate structures? Conferences and missions are often corporations. Union conferences are corporations. The North American Division is even a corporation. The General Conference has a corporation. Some of our institutions, such as hospitals, schools, you know, some of our institutions that are close to us are a separately incorporated corporation. All right? So who owns the above legal purpose? The constituent members and stockholders. So in a conference, the members of the church are the constituents. You know, in a union conference, it's the conferences who are the constituencies of the union, and so on and so on, as you know. So what are the governing documents? The governing documents, the relationship affiliated to and explains what is the integral part of the SDH purpose of the church, and it shall be in harmony of the supportive mission. So ultimately, your governance document still points to the fact that we are a church. We are a religious organization, and that is the main purpose. And within that religion, we provide community services. Within our religious structure, we provide education. But at the end of the day, we are under the umbrella of our church, okay? And we talked about the corporate membership. They must be church members. If you're going to set up a separate organization that's under the umbrella, the majority of the corporate members should be church members. You know, so if you want to bring in people from the community to be part of it, that's not a problem. But you shouldn't be in a situation where the majority is non-church members. All right? Of course, no self-perpetuating boards are allowed, which means at some point, directors should always be coming back up for re-election or new directors. All right? So board is appointed by corporate membership. That's usually how it works. For a certain time period, right? The majority of the board should be church members, and on dissolution of the asset of the corporate structure, the assets must be transferred to another charitable organization. Okay? Any subsequent changes to your documents or your governing documents not only usually has to be reviewed by your conference or your union, we usually say you even have to take it up to the North American division depending. Because the nonprofit status is really all the way up at the GC and the North American division level. Okay? So prior approval by the higher organizations must be done before it goes up to the NAD. So you don't shoot it up to the NAD, because one of the first questions will be, did your conference look at it? You'll be surprised. They'll say no. You know, did your union look at it? No. All right? Applications must be sent to the NAD secretary, and then it's approved by the North American Division Administrative Committee. So full discretionary power is given to NADCOM. If they refuse, they usually give it to you in writing as to what was the reasoning behind that. All right? So don't be premature and assume that you're going to get approval. Take the action to get the approval, because there are certain ramifications. All right? Once initial approval is granted, there may be subsequent reviews by the NAD. So what are some of the benefits of getting your organization approved? One, you're listed in the SDA yearbook. And it's not just that because you're in the yearbook. Because you are in the yearbook, you are in an organization that's permitted to use the name Seventh-day Adventist. Okay? Eligible to participate in retirement plans if you have employees. Eligible to be included under the umbrella of the tax exemption. So you don't have to go and refile for a new tax exemption if you are an approved institution under the NAD. The insurance policies that the church offers that are usually more competitive, you are eligible to get coverage under them, okay? Must operate under the rules of the 501c3. 501c3 is just a fancy way of saying it's a provision in the Internal Revenue Code that tells you under what circumstances a nonprofit gets tax exemption status. We all know what we're talking about when we say tax exempt, right? It's the golden child when you need contributions from donors, right? Because they get to get the deduction from their taxes. That's why they'll make a donation to a tax-exempt organization. All right? So we normally really push that denominational organizations try not to get your own 501c3. One, because they're very cumbersome to maintain. And number two, the church has already gotten an umbrella exemption, which means if your organization is within our organization, you get the same benefit of the exemption. All right? We talked about the subsidiary organizations and their administrative power. We gave you examples of certain organizations that are within our sphere: Hope Channel, food industries, healthcare, publishing. These are all some of our organizations. ADRA, ARM, Andrews, Hope Channel, Adventist World Radio, Pacific Publishing, Oakwood University, Christian Record Services. We can go on and on. I think even Adventist Community Services is a separate institution. So any other institution that are other than ecclesiastical, which means we mean church-based, is what we're talking about, to reflect the policies, organization that established the institution, which means it still needs to point back to the fact that we are. Majority of those governing body has to be church members, right? Board is elected by the constituency. The board directs control and directs who can manage the organization, all right? So the SDA governance system in an institution, it's a standalone entity, may have an employee or who's a member, external chairperson of the board, the director or a CEO is accountable to the board, limited hiring decisions by the board, and we incorporate the status, right? An ecclesiastical or church structure, you're either part of the union, the division, the conference. The chairmen are usually in, right? We have 3 equal persons who are co-equal. More employees may be part of the executive committee. There are multiple hiring decisions, and we have usually unincorporated status below the conference level, okay? So what are some of the legal issues? We talked about it. The lowest corporate structure is the local conference. We can't emphasize that enough. We need to get shy away from, hey, I have this great idea. We need to incorporate this ministry. We need to incorporate this church. No. The conference really should be the lowest level corporate structure. So if you are buying a property, the property needs to be in the name of the conference. All right? You doing an entity, it's an associate. If you're building, you're planting a new church, it doesn't incorporate as its own corporation. It is part of the conference, okay? The local congregation has representatives when the time comes, and those representatives all come together to direct the leadership who will direct the activities, okay? Local churches, schools, centers should not have its own property in its own name, should not sue on its own behalf, should not contract on its own behalf, should not employ individuals on its own behalf. Use your conference. Your conference has resources that you don't have. There are laws and rules that you're going to be held accountable to. Your conference has resources to manage that you do not. Okay? So local entities' relationship to conferences, we said that they're typically not a legal entity. On rare occasions they may be, but typically they're not a separate legal entity, which means you guys take an action, you make a decision, liability rises to your group, which is your conference, okay? Actions of local board members and employees and volunteers, we said may, but I think it's better to say it will bind the conference, all right? That way. Actual and apparent authority, we talked about that. The gentleman had asked about what can he do, right, if his secretary signed a contract. Here's the thing. Actual authority is really an internal thing. And actual authority is who has been given the authority to bind the organization. And because of this theory called apparent, it is very important that your organizations are explicit about who has actual authority. Because actual authority is saying who in the organization really has the authority to bind the organization to a contract or to an obligation, okay? But the law says we don't impose on outsiders to know who has actual authority and who doesn't. So if somebody looks like they have authority, it is enough to bind the organization. So pastors will always look like they have authority in the eyes of the law. All right, so director of Adventist Community Services, in the eyes of the law, will always look like they have authority. I'm going to tell you, I've worked for several organizations, small ones, as well as ones that had as many as 10,000 employees. They're 10,000 employee organization, which is a little county. Billions of dollars go in and out. 4 people in the entire organization had actual authority. And it was really clear who had authority and who didn't. And I'm hoping the secretary was listening, because they would impose on people that if you have apparent authority and you're taking actions in which you are not authorized, it is a fireable offense. It always is a fireable offense. So I say you be very clear who has authority and who doesn't. And if you're not sure, then you probably don't have authority. And you need to check with who does. That's always a good thing to know. So you need to let your volunteers and you as directors and those who work under you, you don't sign nothing. All right? Because if you sign something, especially a vendor or salesman comes along, yeah, we're going to make this work real good. You just got to sign this agreement. You signed it. More likely than not, you're not going to be successful in saying, yes, but this person had no authority. Unless they know it for sure, and you have the burden of proof to demonstrate that they had actual knowledge that this person had no authority, that's the only way you get out. All right, so it's really important that you do not, and like I said, you can bind the entire conference. All right? Local actions can and do have direct impact. That's what we were talking about. Operational boards can have impact on actions that they make that will impact the conference. So local churches or schools or ACS is not a legal entity. They are associations, part of the conference, as we talked about, right? Local board members, employees, and volunteers are agents of the conference, which means their actions will impact the conference. Oh, these people feel bad about screening, so we as a church don't want to make them feel bad, so we're not going to do the background screening. Well, you are an agent of the church and you've made an action. The conference will be held liable, not just that church or not just that community center, okay? We talked about actual and apparent authority. So, is your ACS in the family? Is it unincorporated or separately incorporated from the conference? You should know these things. If so, there are some different issues that come in place. Who is the owner? You need to know that. Who's the constituent? Who controls? What does the governance document state? All right, what are the legal ramifications of being separate? And is it worth it? Those are the issues that you really need to think about. The insurance ramifications. The church has a huge policy. That doesn't mean, and it costs when we make bad mistakes. All right, we'll talk about some of the bad mistakes we do. Remember, you want the conference to hold legal title. You want the conference to set your policies. Not just the North American division, the conference is going to have policies, and you need to follow them. You want the conference to be the employer of your staff. Now, churches have local hires where they're going to pay for the cost of that local employee, but you want that employee to be under your conference, where your conference is doing your payroll, where your conference is issuing your W-2s. Because let me tell you, if you don't follow, you can't say, well, we're an unincorporated, there's only 2 of us and we don't know how to do payroll. Excuse what's going to happen to you if you don't follow the rules, and your conference is equipped to do that. All right, so follow that. Conference provides your spiritual leadership. That's why you elect your leaders. That's what they're there for. They're here to provide support and direction and resources for your ministry, things that you don't have. That's why you come together as a group. All right? What does the conference not do under our structure? It doesn't choose the volunteers for your ministry. So you have an important role to play, because you're the ones who choose the volunteers. They don't determine church membership. They don't determine church discipline matters within the church. It does not determine how the local funds are spent. So there's still a lot of obligation and authority that the conference puts on the local level, right? But if you make certain bad decisions, conferences, even though they've delegated you that responsibility, they still hold the ultimate liability if you don't follow different guidelines, okay? So how do we expose our corporate community as a conference? Liability arises through behaviors of entities, meaning you failed to follow the policy that they gave you. Because of your legal structure, you expose liability to the conference. Actions, behavior, or knowledge, just like we talked about, of employees or volunteers absolutely impacts the conference, okay? Ascending liability, this is basically a simple principle that says agents who take action, principals will be liable for those acts or failure to act. That's it. So basically, every state recognizes ascending liability. So you at the local level make the mistake. It doesn't matter that the conference never knew about it. It doesn't matter that you didn't notify the conference the way they told you to. You are a part of the conference. You took the action. You caused the harm. The liability will rise. And certain actions, they rise all the way up to the North American Division, all the way up to the General Conference. All right, 15 passenger vans. That rises all the way up. All right? Two accidents, our payout was $32 million. Do you understand? $32 million. So when the North American Division switched its policy for should not to shall not, there's a $32 million hard lesson behind that. So for the first time, we had to dip into our catastrophic policy, which means when a payout is so high, we dip into a second insurance policy. But let me tell you, usually you never want to use it because the one time you have to use it, you gonna pay for that. All right? And certain things, because it's a bad decision, it's going to go all the way up. Because, for example, one of the examples, the church said, no, we went and got a policy, for $300,000. You know what the insurance needed when the accident happened? It took a $300,000 check, sent it to the court, canceled the policy, they're done. Because their insurance coverage is only up to $300,000. But the accident went all the way up to $15,000. So if that little insurance covered $300,000, who has to pay the difference? The 14.7. So when we tell you follow policy, there are reasons for that. Oh well, we took all the seats out, so we could use it now, right? No. Maybe we're not gonna pay for a no. No, yeah, I get hot about that. Because maybe we're not going to pay for 8 people who lost their lives, but we're going to pay for the 2 because the standard is still the same. We know that 15 passenger vans are per se unsafe. They are per se, it's not even a question anymore in the eyes of the law whether those vehicles are unsafe. They are unsafe and they are a danger because at a certain speed, something happens, you cannot stop, and the chances are it will flip.
So why are they on the road?
Because people assume the risk. And we're saying we've paid, but we know, and we've paid enough for the risk. So when we say no more 15 passenger vans, no more 15 passenger vans.
Let me stand for this. Our conference big fan of the Lord Schafferberg. Just raise your hand. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
He has been most diligent
Good.
in working on this issue, and he has gotten a lot of flack
Yeah.
over it. Every church in this country
Yes.
knows. Every church. Some members may not know, but the leadership and the pastors, they know. Because Pastor Schafferberg, over and over and over, he has done an excellent job. And we have taken care of that problem.
Amen. Amen. I'm just giving you an example. This is an issue where ascending liability will rise. It will rise to the highest level. So there are, like when we say a policy will be your friend, and a policy will also tell on you. All right?
Okay, just the other day when we were dealing with insurance, one thing that was mentioned was that the new 15-passenger vans, they have double wheels in the back and their rear axles is different.
Yes. Yes.
So does that make a difference?
Yes,
to the
it
church?
does. It does. It does. No, there are many buses, and there are. Right. It's not a 15-passenger van.
It's a difference.
Trust me, the policy does describe what you're talking about. Those are really not 15-passenger vans. We're telling you move to those because those have addressed the issues that were vulnerable with the 15-passenger. There's a reason why 15-passenger vans are so cheap to buy. All right, there's a reason for that. That's why so many people love to get them. They're cheap, but they're cheap because they're dangerous. All right, so who is an agent? We talked about that. The pastor, the teacher, the Pathfinder leader, the volunteer, the Sabbath school superintendent. You know, those are all the deacon. The ARM had a story the other day. Elder decided he wanted to take down some trees of a neighbor. Neighbor said, I don't need my tree taken down. No, we're going to do it for you. And I'm even going to hire somebody who needs some work anyway. We're going to take down your tree. Started taking down the tree. A big piece of the log fell on that person he hired. Paralyzed. The court says the elder is an agent of the church. So all those legal liability of taking care of that quadriplegic for the rest of his life falls under us. So decisions and actions you take can have consequences that affects your entire organization. All right? Don't mean to scare you. Still do the Lord's work. Just be smart about it. Okay? Ratification of repudiation. This is where we were talking about when you find out something. All right? If you find out somebody's taking an action that is not authorized, you have an immediate responsibility to repudiate. If somebody has done a bad act, you have to repudiate because this is what the law says. If you know about it and you do nothing, you have ratified that decision. That decision now becomes yours. Repudiate may not even protect you from liability, but it may limit how much exposure you have. But doing nothing, you now own it. When you know and you haven't taken an action, you now have taken the action. All right? So we talked about how do you expose your conference, selecting unsuitable volunteers, failing to supervise the volunteers, hiring your own employees and you don't know how to manage all of the labor laws responsible for, entering into bad contracts that bind the conference, renting property, depending on be careful what your property is used for. You understand, when you are tax exempt, that means that the state does not assess a tax, property taxes on the property like they do in the house. However, the agreement is that you are using the property for the charitable purposes which you share. So you decide, hey, we can make a whole lot of money. We can rent it to this for-profit organization, and we're going to make tons of money for the nonprofit. Great. And then somebody from the state walks by, looks, figures out that this is no longer being used for charitable purposes, reclassify the property. You now to pay property taxes. All right? So be careful about, I'm not telling you not to do it, but there's certain considerations that you got to think about. What is that total revenue? How much time are they taking from the property? There's certain considerations you need to put into your metrics to decide, is it really worth it? Because certain consequences may be more than what you were asking for. And that's what we were talking about. Non-related church activities, the proper safeguards. Failing to maintain your assets or your vehicles. Okay? Fraud. You guys need a little break? Well, why don't we take, let me give everybody 5 minutes. 5 minutes break. Huh? All right, so the next issue that we want to discuss and hit pretty quickly is there's a term called affinity fraud. All right? What am I talking about when I say affinity fraud? It's fraud that you're seeing more and more all the time. Affinity means a fraud that's based on relationships. Relationships of trust. All right? And the biggest place where you're going to find a relationship in a community of trust is in a church setting. And so more and more we are seeing this affinity fraud, which is scams, essentially, that come under the guise of religious-based investments, you know? And what often happens is all they're saying is, hey, just make an introduction to your community because I have this great God-given thing that's going to provide prosperity for your membership. The reason, one, you don't want to victimize your members because a lot of times if it's in the name of the church or it comes in the name of the church, the trust is that they have in the church is transferred over to this individual. That's how it works. And what happens is more and more members, community folks are taken, and let me tell you, when they come back against these people who usually don't even have the money to repay it, they're looking for who else should be held responsible. And the church, if it's too closely connected or did the introduction within its community, you have exposed your church to liability. That's what we talk about when we say affinity fraud. I trust my church. I trust my pastor. I trust my conference. So if this investment scheme came through my church, you know, after AY, the presentation is going to come up. Or Sunday morning, come back to the church. I'm making the announcement, Sunday morning, come to hear this great idea. You've just basically endorsed the scheme. All right? I have a great deal for you. Can't lose, right? The Lord gave me this great investment idea that's going to give you a return on investment that no other professional can even give you, right? The church takes a hit because of our reputation, right? The church also looks liable if it looks like it was part of it, if it supports it, if it endorses it. An endorsement can just mean an announcement. Support it could mean that you opened up your facilities for them to make that presentation. All right? So fraud among people with a common bond is what they're always looking for. Always religious, ethnic, racial, or professional, you know? So you maybe hit all three in the church. All right? So what is their MO, modus operandi? They speak the language of the church. They can speak in spiritual terms. They know all the vocabulary. They want to gain access to your members, so they come through the church. You know, they're saying the same things. Invest early. We guarantee certain returns. We pay as promised. We have finder's fees for recruitment. You know what I'm talking about. You're not only going to make money in this investment, but for every person that you bring in under this, you all know what I'm talking about. Y'all know which kind of schemes I'm talking about. 5 links. Ponzi schemes, right? Which means everybody under you, because you have people working under you, they make a certain amount of money. These are old tricks, but they all are the same tricks. All right? You know who this is? Exactly. That's what he started. He started with his community. Who knows who this is? Oh, yeah. New Yorkers from Queens, y'all always gonna know who this is. The beauty about Bernie was he got to a point where people were actually begging him to take their money. He'd be like, no, my portfolio's too big, I can't. No, please, you have to take it. I know you. So it was all about his relationships. It was the people he was the closest to, who was in his same community, ran in his same circle. That's what makes it usually effective. So has it started to translate into the Adventist church? Absolutely, absolutely. 4 church girls posing as city traders. 1,000 members of the Adventist church into handing over their life savings. 3.2 million pounds. Okay, you see? So it's happening within our church already. Florida man sentenced to nearly 13 years in prison for running an affinity fraud scheme that targeted members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So it's already happening. You are the targets. All right? $6.5 million from 250 victims. All right? Somebody in the street wouldn't have a chance making the pitch. But because the pitch came in through the church was how they got victimized. All right? Another story. $3 to $4 million Ponzi scheme out in Florida. Pastor lost almost $200,000 of his own money. All right? We are a church that is about saving souls, getting ready for the second coming. I don't care how great the deal is. Leave that stuff outside the church. That's the easiest thing I can tell you. Leave it outside the church. I don't care how good of a friend they are. They want to make an announcement. They want to use your facility to help people get financially stable. Stay away from it. Not interested. Nope. All right? So they use their influence. Like I said, use your influence is really what they're using. Using your authority. They're using your connections to the community to advance the scheme. All right? And these are all the little code words that you hear. Higher return. Because here's the rule. Any Wall Street person will tell you. The higher the risk, the higher the return, the higher the risk. There's no such thing as low risk, high return. All right? There's a reason why if you put it in the bank, you get 0.02% return. There's a federally insurance behind the big bank, behind everything. So the safer you are, the lower the return. So if I'm giving you a high risk, a high return, it's already risky. And there's a number one thing. You never invest what you can't afford to lose. That's the number one. I don't care if even in the stock market. Even if you're going to do a prudent investment, they're going to tell you. The bank FDIC, which means if I fraudulently lose your money, you get up $200,000 back. But even when you're going to go with the most reputable firm in Wall Street, they're going to tell you up front, it's not guaranteed. If Apple goes belly up tomorrow, everybody who owned Apple stock, they don't get to go to the people and say, hey, I want my money back. So I tell you high rate of return, and they tell you low risk, that's already the red flag. All right? So what happens? When the losses occur, investors are looking for their money back. And when they're looking for their money back, they're talking to a lawyer. If they're talking to a lawyer like me, guess what we're looking for? We're looking for deep pockets. Guess where the nearest deep pocket is? The church. So especially if all you got to tell me is that the pastor introduced this person to the community, or right after we closed, after we had Vespers, the person came up and did their presentation. All right? So it's enough for me to basically say, you endorsed this. But for your inviting this person into this community, my client's not being exposed. Somebody got to pay my client back. Right? Why? Because we're gonna deem that you promoted the investment. You used the church location and church property for the meetings. Presentations made at the pastor's meeting, after AY. Testimonials. This is a person this is my good brother, All right? So what to do? Always ask for references, right? I basically say stay away from this. But you check from references. Stay with what you know. If this is something outside of your level of expertise, you better find somebody who you can hire who knows what they're talking about. All right? Obtain written information, details about the risk. Because the moment they tell you no risk but high return, you already know what that is. All right? For more information, we actually have resources at the North American Division or at the General Conference and say, hey, I need some resources. Or there's a website that can give you even more information. The biggest from it, okay? It's happened before. I gave you 3 or 4 examples. It'll always happen again. All right? Greater Ministries founder was sentenced to 27 years in prison. The wife was sentenced to 13 years. Look at how much he took, $580 million from 20,000 investors, in which approximately 7,000 were Seventh-day Adventists. All right? So what was promised? Probably the sky. In religious terms, using all of our vocabulary. All right? So bottom line, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. All right? Theft. You guys deal with a lot of money. You guys are responsible for money going in and out. Remember, we had a story. A treasurer who was formerly in the government, worked for the Inspector General's office, was convicted of fraud and losing $1.3 million of the congregation's money. He had been, I think, the treasurer for over 25 years. I'm going to tell you, treasurers are great and they are a rare breed. I know. You find a good one, you just want to keep them. But there is some value in recycling. There is some value. Or there's some value of bringing in some counterbalance oversight and internal control. All right? 25 years he served. I'm sure he wasn't fraudulent for 25 years, but he fell for the Nigerian scheme. We have tons of money, millions of dollars, give us some money and we can clear a whole bunch of money. It sounded too good to be true. Not only invested his own money, turned around and used 1.3 million of the church's money. All right? So what does working policy say? When we have a volunteer or an employee who performs an act that is considered a violation of the law, like theft, embezzlement, we report it to the authorities. We file charges. All right, that's what we do. We don't. I mean, the other day we got multiple complaints he's a travel agent. Had been doing basically group trips for the church organizations all over NAD. Had done it for more than 10 years. But all of a sudden, people started having $50,000 missing here, $60,000 missing here, $30,000. Group trips are expensive. What did we find out? He wasn't bonded. He had no insurance. But people, because of their relationship with him, they were giving him the money up front for a trip that was 6 months, 8 months, a year from now. Finding out 2 days before they had to travel, no tickets, no hotels. We gathered all the information, we forwarded it to the FBI. We don't play. And some people are like, oh, maybe he had a heart. No, 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 no. The way I feel is we have a trust within this community. And because we have a trust as part of Adventists, we give people the benefit of the doubt that we normally wouldn't. If somebody violates that trust, they have violated all of us. So I don't believe in give them a chance. You have taken advantage of our trust, and I find you worse than an outsider who tried to take advantage, and I file charges. And we're supposed to do that because you are protecting our community. We can't be in a situation where we can't even trust each other, and that's essentially what's happening.
May I?
Yes.
This is dealing with the in-gathering, old in-gathering.
Yes.
We call it Hope for Humanity.
Yes.
Which is under our responsibility.
Yes.
Yes. And to me, that is a huge trust issue.
It is.
We collect the money from our community for the benefit of community outreach ministry. And sometimes we collect those in-gathering money and use for our summer, camp program or camp meeting, or sometimes we subsidize our operational costs. And to me, that is unethical. I think it's violating that trust that we
Yeah.
So the in-gathering funds that we collect from our community, the 100% of the proceeds must be reinvested in our community, our outreach ministry.
There you go. All right. So how do we prevent some of these things from happening to us? Is your ACS center the next target? What are some of the vulnerabilities? Too much trust placed in one person or key people, right? Lack of separation of accounting responsibilities, meaning that the same person takes the money, counts the money, deposits the money, writes the check, and you have no second person watching. And been doing it for years, and no one looks. Let me tell you something. You have a treasurer who gets offended because you ask basic due diligence questions. That's a problem. And as a board or a director, you should ask questions. That doesn't mean you don't trust them. That means you're doing your job. And if you get too defensive over me asking you about transparency, it's time for a change. And you got to have your audits done.
Quick comment, please. The scenario that you just showed us a moment ago from the newspaper or from the press release, if you read the story, there was a situation where this person got sucked into a con situation.
Yes.
My point is simply that we tend to think that, this person's honest and trustworthy. The good people get sucked into bad situations.
Yes.
We protect them by following the
You're exactly right. So me asking you for transparency, internal controls should not be I'm telling you that I would be very clear. Any treasurer, anybody who handles money, you should be an open book. It shouldn't matter when we ask you. We should be able to ask you 3 times for the same thing. But if you get really defensive about showing the books of an organization or proving transactions, that to me is a red flag. All right? What are some of the things we can do? We talked about it, background checks. The other thing that you do is there a standard of living that is beyond what their actual earnings are, right? I make a $50,000 salary, but now I'm driving a Maybach, and then I'm going on a vacation every other year. I mean, if I'm handling the organization's money, someone should be able to ask me, where you got that money? Right? And unless I can show you my rich uncle who loved me very much, took care of me, my $50,000 or whatever salary shouldn't afford that next level of standard of living. So where's that coming from? All right? Yes. Yes. Right. But that's why you have to look at the books. You have to ask questions. I know they're a pain, but you as leaders have to ask. You have to look. You have to check. Some traits of a thief, they work overworked, odd hours, always by themselves. No one's there, unduly cautious about simple questions, right? Have a hard time explaining something that doesn't make sense, right? So, how do you protect? Basic internal controls. You should have 2 or more folks. If one person handles the money and does the deposits, someone else should be doing the bank reconciliation. That's a very simple. One person bank reconciliation, one person. It shouldn't be the person who handles the cash is also reconciling the bank account. And that should be a regular item on your board. When I'm doing the financial report, okay, did we get the bank reconciliation report? Has the bank reconciliation? All right, written records, properly made, separate duties, question suspicious transactions, and don't get offended. I would say it right up front. The fact that you're offended is what is raising my red flag. And bring in your hard questions. That's what they're there for. And push come to shove, order an audit. We got auditors in the church. All right? Like I said, your board meeting, one item that should be there every meeting is what are our finances? What came in? What went out? What is our position? Anything interesting or out of the ordinary happened? Explain. All right? So, make it hard to steal. Majority of your workers will not steal, but you know what? People are human. People have shortcomings. All right? Don't make yourself an easy target. Right? Careful supervision. Avoid the easy opportunities. Accounting controls. Okay? Require your employees or your treasurer to take vacations where someone else has to handle their stuff. Right? That'll tell on them real quick. Right? Stealing a nonprofit, we have, like I said, they could become convoluted, very complicated, but you can find it, but you usually got, and you smell something, right? How about when you're gone for a couple days from your house and you come home and you smell something? What do? Exactly. You start saying, okay, some don't smell right, right? And what do? You just say, it'll just take care of itself. You just start looking around, right? You open the fridge, you go to the garbage, you just keep until you find it, right? Same thing. When something doesn't look right, doesn't smell right, I know it's uncomfortable, but your leaders, your job is to start sniffing out. Where's that coming from? Explain to me why that doesn't make sense. All right? Fraudulent disbursements, paying for false or inflated bills. That's why you keep processes in place. Must have an invoice connected to the check, connected blah, blah, blah. There's a reason for that. So when somebody wants to go and check, it all makes sense. right? Or why am I paying 10 times more than we normally pay for X? What's the explanation behind that? Expense report, falsified claims, check tampering, falsified cash, all these kind of things. Just check for it, okay? How do you do it? Some preventative steps. Do the background check. I don't care how, like they said, oh, somebody just showed up into your community. He has a wonderful financial resume, and just when you needed somebody in that financial position, boom, you put them in there, right? No. Anybody who's going to serve in this position got to do a financial background check, and they have to be bondable. Because you know what a bond means. The insurance says if we bond this person and they steal from you, we have to repay it. And before the insurance is going to put a bond on somebody, guess what they're going to do? So somebody with multiple bankruptcies, guess what the insurance company is going to say? We're not going to bond them. So if an insurance company is not going to bond them, what should you do? Right? If you're not bondable, you probably shouldn't be handling our money. All right? Trust means you have written procedures. And we check to make sure these procedures are being followed. And when they're not, you ask. I know we're best friends and we hang out. But if I'm not able to ask, then I'm not doing my job. Risky business. Never hear this, we can't be sued because we're a church. Nope. We are doing the Lord's work. You are doing the Lord's work. But that doesn't absolve us of being responsible. All right? We are by the law, not so much. Control every action of our volunteers. But you can control reasonable. You are required to have reasonable control. If we don't know about it, we're not responsible. Nope. All of those are false. Right? Not going to. Who are the different types of employees? You know, you have independent contractors, you have contract employees, you have regular employees. And then we have, that's on the contract level, then you have even locally funded employees. Right? And then you have volunteers. Those are all types of employees. But let me tell you, all those issues have tax laws, federal laws, labor standard laws, now states, and now even local jurisdictions have labor or wage laws. They have all these things that come into play. So that's why we say, even when you're going to get an employee that's locally funded, maybe you have the money for it, run them through your HR department at your conference because they have resources to make sure that certain things are done. Independent contractors, people love to do that. Hey, we do independent contractors, but you don't have to pay taxes. Here's the problem. The IRS does not just say, you get to decide if somebody's employee versus independent contractor. In fact, the IRS says we actually favor employees versus independent contractors because that's how we get our money to pay for what we do. So they say we created our own test. It's like 20 factors. And they basically say if you fail a sufficient number of those and you treated that person as an independent contractor, we will go back and say you were supposed to have treated them as an employee. We're going to hit you with a penalty and a fine, and then we're going to assess you for all the payroll taxes that you should have paid that you didn't pay. That's why we say use your conference. They have the resources to tell you whether you can treat somebody as an independent contractor or an employee. And if they are an employee, you better pay them as if they're an employee. All right? We talked about that. Payroll deductions, Social Security taxes must be withheld. You have to contribute the employer's portion of the Social Security taxes and payroll taxes. Whether or not the ADA or the Federal Labor Standards Act applies or not, These are the questions that you're going to be held responsible for, which is why we say you can't just make these decisions on your own. Whether you need to verify for employment status, whether minimum wage, or whether they're subject to overtime. Let me tell you, the labor laws say it is treble damages if you have violated people's law. Treble. That means we figure out what your fine was, we time it by 3. All right? That's why lawyers love these cases. All right? 1099s versus W-2. There's a reason. The law says you must give somebody a W-2. Must, not should or I'll get around to it. All right? There is a significant increase in enforcement and enforcement against nonprofits. Yes?
We go back to that slide there. I don't know how to handle this situation. There are times when individuals come in and do something for a department,
Mm-hmm.
and they charge, say, 2,000,
Mm-hmm.
3,000, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is, and they are paid that amount of money. But a W-2 is not done.
You give them a 1099 at the end of the year.
Okay. But that is not being done sometimes. Sometimes it's treated like they do something for the individual and they give them that, and you know,
And we all square.
but not only that, no, it looks as if you're being hard. If you're saying, you know, we have to do it the right way, we have to get these documents, that's like you're trying to be difficult, and you know what I mean? So I'm happy you're saying it again.
Yes.
Because in our conference, there are times when this is not followed.
I'm telling you, we even had to impose stronger processes at the General Conference to make sure we are applying the law. We have certain questionnaires that we developed with HR that we have these people, we have department heads make sure they respond to. That helps us decide based on because really what the law is looking at is how much control you have over this individual. Do you have other individuals in your organization that is doing the exact thing as an employee? You know, there's different factors, but when you look at the totality, it's control, you know, and if you're not doing the W-2, I believe the threshold, yes, you can give them a W-2, right. But at the end of the year, if you're an employee, you get a W-2. 1099, I believe the threshold is $600. Yes, but I think it's $600. Anything under $600, you don't need a 1099. Anything over, even though they meet the independent contractor status, you should be issuing a 1099.
So we as electors and administrators, we can insist that we're not paying out
Until they do this process. Right. And that's why we say, and if they're going to be an independent contractor, guess what we now require at the GC? It's the C word that we talked about. What? Say that? I heard what? A contract. Because you're not an employee. You are a vendor. So let's have a contract that makes it clear what we intended. All right? So what are some of the basics of employment? You got to be careful between exempt versus non-exempt. Now that's gotten even more confusing than it was before, given that the new administration is trying to roll back. So some has been rolled back or whatnot. See, but if nonprofits really relied on the exempt versus non-exempt, because we were like, we could pay people less because we just say they're exempt, so they're getting the salary. That's for us, we keep our costs down. But the laws are changing, so you got to be really careful about that.
How does the law
Yes.
departments.
Yes.
And I contract a company outside of the United States
Mm-hmm.
to do that there.
Overseas.
No, in no.
Right. See, from that perspective, the 1099 is not someone who's not going to be subject to paying income taxes in the United States don't really need a 1099, but it's not a bad idea to still have a contract in place where you give some clarity as to what is the concrete terms of your arrangement. All right? Some people, some organizations for the ease, they just make everybody go through the process. And then obviously if you're an overseas company, you either get it or you don't get it, but they start with everybody goes through the process. That way no one slips through the crack and then we are not subject to potential fines and penalties.
So there's a difference also between a company and an individual, correct? In other words, a company, you may need the company,
It's easier if somebody's a corporation. It's easier if they have multiple clients. Now somebody, that's also one of the red flags. If you are their sole source of income and they're an independent contractor, but you're their only client and all their work is done for you and all their work is done on your facility, you are opening yourself up to a reclassification issue. All right? And then now the new thing you got to really be careful of, because of minimum wage, the federal minimum wage has been so low for so long, a lot of states and local jurisdictions are now setting their own minimum wage. So you got to make sure you're up to date, because you may pay a federal, but if you're living in a jurisdiction where their local wage is higher, you're responsible for paying the higher wage, okay? My time is almost up. I got to start speeding. Really, I'm not going to spend too much time on exemptions because it's become a very complicated issue. Just understand that exemption was really meant for administrative level employees, people who are supervising, people who are managers, because the thought process is, because you're at a management level, I already kind of pay you above. So because of that, you're not subject to the hours and wages and breaks and time requirements, okay? But be careful with that, okay? And we have people at the Office of General Counsel. If you need somebody to give you some help through the specifics, we have folks that can help you, or at least direct you to resources that can help you, okay? Voluntary or unauthorized overtime. Be very clear about overtime, because if somebody has worked overtime, you owe it. It doesn't matter if you said no. If they worked it, you better pay it. You don't get a chance to say, well, if you want to keep your job, you'll just look the other way. No, no, no. You've opened yourself up to all kind of potential liability, okay?
What's the difference between overtime and contact?
Meaning that you're giving them some yeah, I think that for potential employees, people who are be clear, anything over, I think it's 40, and it's more than, and I think it can't be more than 10 hours a day. All right, so the law has a bright line for non-exempt employees. So once that overtime time is triggered, you got to pay it. So I'm not the big official expert on it, but I just know the federal and the state laws are extremely stringent about that. All right? I-9 requirements. Like we said, this is why you want your conference to be the employer, because they know which forms need to be filled out and what are the documentation that has to be provided in order to establish the status of an employee that is eligible to work. And I know we want to be good to our folks, even those that we know are undocumented, they need to make a living. Yes, 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 yes. But when you fall afoul with knowledge of the law, you are opening yourself up to risk. That's all I'm saying. You're opening yourself up to risk and liability. 3 business days following to hire You got about 3 business days after you hire necessary documentation. All right? It doesn't necessarily require you to keep documents, but the documents, but you better have records to show that you reviewed the actual documentation. Like I said, the IRS, the I-9 is a government form that's there to help you, okay? You can keep it for 3 years after hire or 1 year after the employee leaves, whichever comes last. Those are some of the basic requirements. Volunteers. Can we pay a volunteer? Yes or no? We cannot pay a volunteer because the moment you pay a volunteer, they are no longer a volunteer. You understand? We cannot pay them.
You get brownie points.
You can reimburse them for out-of-pocket expenses, all right? And here's what you normally can't do. You can't take an employee and then tell them they are volunteering to do a work that they normally do as an employee. Is that clear? That happens. Yes. They are paid to answer the phones for 4 hours a day and file. You can't say, hey, for the next 4 hours, you're now a volunteer. I'm just telling you. You have opened yourself up. All right? And volunteers, these same federal laws can be held against nonprofits. It's like we said, you can't say I'm a church or I'm a community service, therefore I'm exempt from the obligations. Vehicles, we talked about it, so I can skip it. Here's the picture. All right? This is why you can say the mean attorney from the General Conference came to you and told you to turn in those tags and dispose of those 15-passenger vans. And there are conferences who have said to their pastors that if I see a 15-passenger van being operated by your church, it is a terminating offense. There are conferences who have said that. And I have no problems with that because I'm.
From the Caroline Conference, when we got that notice,
Yep.
I read the statement to the church board and said, if I do not tell you, I can suffer disciplinary or termination of my employment.
Right. Done. Park the van, take the plates off, and if you can't find somebody to buy it, donate it. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. All right? If you're going to donate it, not to another Adventist organization, please. Please. Because all you're going to do is take the problem from one pot and putting it in the next. All right? We talked about that. Awful. Trademarks. What's this? Everybody, anywhere in the world, you look at that and you know what that is, and they are fierce about their trademark. And because they're fierce about the trademark, they don't allow anyone who's not a McDonald's to be a McDonald's. There's a reason why we have trademarked our name, Seventh-day Adventists. And all of us are the watchdogs. Because here's what the law says. One of the requirements for the government to protect your trademark is that you yourself must be vigilant about your own trademark. Which means if we have strict policy rules about who can say they're Adventist and who can market Adventism and who can take an Adventist logo and put it on a t-shirt and sell it, all right? Or who could put Pathfinders, which is also trademarked. And we don't aggressively watch over our own trademark, when we find what happens the day will be that we see someone who we don't want using our name, who's causing confusion, and then we're going to want to take every action that we can to protect our reputation and name, and we won't be able to because we weren't vigilant enough ahead of time. So it's not that we're trying to be mean or there is a process, right? So the trademark says we have a name. You have a name. That logo has been trademarked. It belongs to the church. You don't give it out willy-nilly. People must have a license to use the trademark. And there is a process. You want to use it to sell t-shirts? We're not saying you can't, but we have a process. Contact the Office of General Counsel. There's a form. There's probably a fee that you have to pay if you want to use it for commercial uses. If you are part of our church and part of the yearbook, like we said, you are licensed to use it. If you are an outside organization, you are not. And if you look and turn the other way and say, this is my buddy, I'm not going to enforce it, you've put your own trademark at risk.
May I?
Yes.
And also, we have a few sinners among us that used our trademark and created separately incorporated nonprofit organizations.
Yeah.
That is not permissible. Is that okay with you? I know you act like an Adventist, look like an Adventist, but you cannot do that. You cannot create a separate ACS, nonprofit organization under your name. Is that right? Yeah.
Same with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. All right?
I have a question. I'm sorry. What about if I would like to give a gift to my elders and give them a shirt and has the logo of the Seventh Church? Is that permissible? Is that okay? Do I need information?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, one shirt.
Yes.
Yes, you can do it because you are part of the organization. What you can't, but let me give you another scenario. Can one of your elders decide he's going to make a whole bunch of Seventh-day Adventist elders T-shirts and start to sell them at some fair or their camporee? And I created this really cool looking T-shirt, and I want to put Pathfinders on the logo, the Pathfinder logo, and all that, and I want to sell it up there. No, because it's a commercial use unless he's gotten a license. And we're saying there is a way that you can get a license. Because there are people who do use our stuff for commercial uses, but they get permission from us. Exactly. And if you are not our watchdogs, the day may come when somebody who you don't want using our name is going to do it, and then you're going to come to us, and they may be able to show all these exceptions where you let other folks use it without advocating for your brand, and that way you've lost it.
There are some churches that offer on Saturday, but they're not under the umbrella of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but they use that logo, and they also use the ACS logo.
No.
Well, you guys need to get some people out.
Hence why we say you are our watchdogs. Let me be clear. When you let us know, we always act. Right before my colleague and coworker that works in intellectual property for our office, she just went on maternity leave. That Friday, she had like 10 letters going out telling people to cease and desist. So when you come and know about these things, you tell our office, we will act. Our job is to protect your brand. But you are our eyes and ears. If you do not let us know, we cannot send these letters. All right? Like we said, you can use them if you are in the yearbook for non-commercial purposes only. Local churches may use the trademark if they have approved status. Churches that have approved status with the local conference for non-commercial use only. Clear, all right? Permission has to be given. The trademark actually belongs to the general conference. So you have to go all the way up to the general conference and ask permission. Typically you go to the Office of General Counsel. They'll direct you exactly of where to go. Permissions are given at the GC's discretion. Typically, you better get a recommendation by the local conference. Start there. Activities and the theology has to be in harmony with the church. Organizations, board, and membership are all members of the church in regular standing. Okay? It's not for outside groups. Anticipated use is not in conflict with other use. And I have to stress, non-commercial use only. Okay? This is a good example. Creation Seventh-day Adventist Church. You know, we find out about that, we're going to put a cease and desist. You know, Adventist for X. Seventh-day Adventist for such and such, right?
So, I'm sorry, in this case, they only use the word seven, I mean, the letter, the number seventh day.
Oh, thank you.
And then, so,
They use Seventh-day Adventist.
but it's not written out, so it doesn't matter.
The question is likelihood of confusion.
Gotcha.
That's the standard of the law.
Gotcha,
And they cannot use the word Adventist church.
All right? If there's a likelihood of confusion, we have the right to protect. Just like you can't do, like you couldn't do a N that looks like the McDonald's.
Right, okay.
If there's a likelihood of confusion, they get a chance to protect it. All right? And you are our eyes and ears. They're not part of us. They're not in a conference. I would let us know. I would let the Office of General Counsel know. Or let your conference know. Your conference knows to contact us, and we know to help. All right? Protect your name. All right? The church is you. Really quick, copyrights. Copyrights is an exclusive set of works that someone has created and they own, right? And they've put some protection on it. It's fixed and it's a tangible form. Excuse me. For example, music, right? For example, poems, artwork. You know, these books, these are all copyrightable. All right? Yep, pictures. Artists. Let me tell you something. One of the biggest expenses that the church now has to pay for regularly, and your conference, because it does trickle down to your conference, is violation of copyrights. Especially now in the internet, right? Ooh, look at this great picture. Perfect for my PowerPoint, right? Or my flyer. Copy it, paste it, great. Guess what? If it makes it onto the internet, there are now bots that have been programmed just to go and look for copyrightable materials. And we get hit with this all the time. If they find the copyright, then they try to trace it back. Do you have a license to this person? If they don't, then a bigger bill, a hit, gets sent to the general conference. We found out that you used this and it wasn't authorized. If you don't have a license for it, you must pay X, which is significantly more expensive. So what are some of the differences? You can actually hire somebody to create a work of art that you now own. But you better be clear about that. This is why we say about contracts, don't take it for granted. When we created that logo, our director didn't create the logo. They most likely hired somebody. But the agreement was very clear. This is a work for hire, which means when you have completed the work, we will own the copyrights and the intellectual property. If you don't spell that out, you may think you're paying for something that you don't really own. Or maybe they're only granting you a license. Maybe they're not even granting you a license. Maybe you have bought it, you own it, and then they're turning around and selling it to someone else because you were not specific. All right?
Women's Ministry logo, you can buy it from, I guess, Advent Source. So if you're doing flyers,
Non-commercial, remember, If you are part of our church organization, which means you're in the yearbook and you have a non-commercial use, you already have a license to use our logos.
But they're not in the yearbook, but they're selling it to you.
Who?
Women's ministries of the church. There's a logo, the three little things.
You're right. But aren't they? Well, I know women's ministries is one of the ministries that are part of the church.
Yeah, so they give you the logo that you can use, and so I think that.
As long as you're using, if you are part of our organization, you have a non-commercial use, you already are granted a license. Now, you want to use it to sell stuff, you need to, all right? So your ownership rights, you can copy it, you can distribute it, you can publicly perform it, you can display it, you can make derivative works. That's another thing. You can't just change a slight thing and say, okay, now it's something different, so I'm good. That doesn't work. And derivative work is very broadly defined. It could be substantially different, but if it's found to be a derivative work of the original, that copyright still may apply.
What about the part-time insurance? You're sending out for them to put the logo on the name of the product insurance.
Right.
And you have to set it up to get it done.
Right. But it's for the church, not a commercial use. And if you are a church that is within our yearbook, church meaning you're part of the conference that is part of our church, you have the right to use. That logo was created and protected for your use. They're paying for the shirt. But I'm just saying, if you decide, I'm going to open up a stand, right, or at the next camporee, or I'm opening up a camporee and I designed this really great Pathfinder shirt and I'm going to just sell it to all these different clubs. That's a non-commercial use, all right? So like we talked about, infringement is when you're using it and you don't have authority to use it. And it is so much more expensive to use it without permission than to get the license. So we're not saying you can't use it. The problem is you must get a license. You see a great visual. There's a reason why we tell you go subscribe. If you know you have to use constant graphic arts for different things, go ahead and pay the fee for the membership that gives you the license to use the images within that library or to use that photo, because it is so much cheaper to pay for that license to use it than for them to find it and then go back against you for violation. That includes those of you who have services that are live streamed. You know, you play certain songs that you did not write, all right? There are services that you pay ahead of time that gives you a license to use that music for the intended purposes, and make sure the intended purposes are clear. Because if you're using somebody's copyrightable material in the wrong way, the way they can hit you will be significantly more expensive. And I think it usually hits the general conference. They have to pay it, but the treasurers have a way of talking to each other, because if they're able to identify who it is, that bill will eventually show up towards that person, okay? So avoid infringing. I talked about that.
That also covers the hymns that are not in the current hymnal by the General Conference, the current Seventh-day Adventist hymnal.
Well, the current Seventh-day Adventist hymnal is covered because it's own.
I'm saying there are some that are in the old hymnal that people like to sing and they sing them. Is there
I'm not talking about perform within the church, but I'm saying once you decide to stream your service, once you decide to stream your service, which means a public, I'm just saying you have to be a little more deliberate about what you do. And I'm saying you have to ask more questions. And the way you cover yourself is to recognize that there are licensing services that say depending on what you're going to broadcast, pay this fee and we have granted you the license. Which means you are now covered.
That is for a one-time service or for?
Normally you can pay for like a year.
It all depends.
But you got to be clear about the use, because they'll ask you, what is your use? If you're saying, well, we only have church service and we're within, they may charge you one thing. But if you say I have a service and then I live stream, that may be a difference. So be clear about what you're doing and how you intend to use it so that the license you have is covering your use. I got to wrap up because I'm out of time.
Going back to the church hymnal, so I bought the church hymnal, and so I can make as many photocopies as I want of everything in there, right?
No. No, you can't. That includes inquires. I'm gonna tell you, people love to buy the one sheet music, and even though it clearly says it's copyright, do not duplicate. You guys go ahead and do that. You're really breaking the law. You're infringing on somebody's copyright. I'm just saying. I'm not gonna tell on We got to wrap up, but let me talk quickly about leadership and if you're on the board. There are certain duties that are imposed because you are on a board or you hold a leadership position, okay? You have a duty of knowledge. I'm going to have to be real quick and wrap this up. I'm almost at the end anyway. Duty of care. When I mean duty of knowledge, you can't put your head in the sand. Like we said, you walk into the house after being gone for vacation and you hear that funny smell hits you. You know something is wrong. Your knowledge tells you, I have to go investigate. It's the same thing. I'm in leadership position. Something doesn't smell right. Oh, I'm going to go into uncomfortable territory. You have that duty. You have a duty to care, which means the people you serve, the communities that you're around. Duty to provide a reasonable skill and prudence, which is why somebody with a reckless driving record, right, or a suspended license probably shouldn't be your driver, right? Duty of diligence, duty to manage, duty of obedience to your policy. That's what that means. And the rules that your superiors have told you. Duty to loyalty. Here's the thing. Yes, you're doing this organization, but somebody tells you, hey, you can use this position to somehow enhance your personal wealth or to give you a better financial position. Your duty is to this organization above and beyond yourself. That's what that means. You can't put yourself or your family or your friends ahead of your obligations to the organization. Duty of confidentiality, especially if you are an officer. You discuss some very sensitive stuff. And let me tell you, basically, only the stuff that you tell your pastors in certain circumstances, your spouse in certain circumstances, and your attorney is confidential. Everything else that you tell anybody else is not confidential and can come out. And I love it when people have privileged conversations outside of the people who don't have a privilege. Because even if they won't tell you, you can't even go to court now and call it privilege because you yourself has pierced the privilege. All right? Fiduciary care duty, you have a care to put the financial well-being of the organization above yourself, your friends, your family. All right? I kind of gave you the quick one so I can get near the end. Conflicts of interest is what we're talking about at the end of the day. Conflicts of interest happens all the time. They're not all bad. But here's the thing. If you have a conflict of interest, first of all, it needs to be disclosed. There should never be a secret conflict of interest. That's the beginning of knowing that it's wrong. If you have a conflict of interest, usually you better disclose it up ahead. Oh, you're about to talk about this contract with this vendor? Well, this vendor is my brother-in-law. I have disclosed that I have a conflict. which normally means I'm not going to advocate for or against it because I have a conflict of interest. Or I don't keep saying the only vendor you could use is my wife. Why can't I say that? Because I have a conflict of interest. I am directly benefiting from that relationship. So I am not putting my duty to the organization above my own financial well-being. All right? Like I said, it's the biggest thing to do is you disclose. You usually shouldn't be part of the decision making when you have your own benefit to make. And for the most part, stay away from conflicts of interest. All right? Get prior approval from someone who doesn't have a conflict before an action is taken to make sure that you protect yourself and you protect the organization. All right? Be very careful with confidential information. We live in a new age of identity fraud. You already see what happened in Equifax and the whole 9 yards. Obligations are now being put on organizations to safeguard your data, employees' information. You are now held liable if you don't take the reasonable steps. Personnel, your donors' financial information, Social Security numbers, EIN numbers, HIPAA laws about medical information. I mean, you provide health care. Be careful. All these things raises issues that you need to work out policies and you need to think through them. Okay, we live in a complex world where now the government imposes the duty to keep these information confidential on the organization. All right? I'm going to close up. Trust is slowly gained, but you can lose it really fast. And once it's lost, it's much slower to regain. So we all have a corporate responsibility to each other, right? And we've only really scratched the surface. Oh, I passed out because some of that information is still in your booklet. I just went about 11 minutes past my time, so I apologize for that. But you do a good work. Remember, you're doing God's work. The Lord protects us from so many of our own mistakes. Trust me, we know that. But that doesn't take away our obligation to do what is right and to make sure that we're being prudent and strong managers. And I'm going to pray for you guys to continue to prosper and to do your work.